We'll begin our official recording. Thank you all so much for joining us for Cultivating Community Leadership and Power Within Ecosystems for Safety. Again, my name is Janae and I'm with Prevent Connect. We're really excited to host this web conference in partnership with our friends over at Prevention Institute. And I will pass it over to the Prevention Institute team now. Take it from here if you would like to. Everyone, we are really excited to work with Will, Zach, and Lisa for this web conference.
All right. Thank you, Janae, for the wonderful intro, and good to see everyone. I think we just passed the 200 participants mark, so I'm feeling all sorts of things, particularly excited and a little bit jittery, but just glad to see you all. And so looking forward to today's conversation. I wanted to check real quick, Janae, if we were going to launch any polls before we jump in. And if not, that's all good.
I don't think we have any from the Prevent Connect side as we jump in. I think the first one, yeah, go ahead.
Cool. All right. So, hey, everyone. I'm Will Crary, Associate Program Manager with Prevention Institute, and I work out of PI's Oakland office. We also have offices in LA, Houston, and DC. And we're a national nonprofit that just focuses on building prevention, health, equity, and racial justice into key policies and actions at the federal, state, local, and organizational level, focusing on the community determinants of health. And so you'll see a lot of what Janae just described as some of the key components of how we frame these conversations. That's going to be just through lines of our entire dialogue today. And I'm joined by my colleague, Zach, and we were supported by one of our beloved directors, Lisa, who is not joining, but really supported us in developing a lot of this content. So Zach, I don't know if you want to say a quick hello.
Hey, thanks for joining, everyone. Happy to be here.
Cool. So Zach and I are excited to facilitate just the beginning of our content here. And what I'm going to do is advance us through so we can see our objectives. So you saw the title of what we're focusing on. We're really trying to bring this ecosystem approach and how that can improve and sustain collaborative upstream efforts. We want to explore how community leadership and addressing power dynamics, and particularly power imbalances, is important for long-term safety strategies. And we're going to hear from some guest speakers, particularly Iona Harrison from Urban Institute, who we're just so delighted to get to partner with on this. And then talk a little bit about skills to develop to support this kind of work, and want to hear some of the experiences that you all are bringing. So hoping for a continued lively chat like I'm already seeing. So appreciating everyone's participation and engagement. And I know our guest speaker will too. So we're going to start with a grounding exercise. Going to ask that everyone kind of entertain this little imaginative grounding exercise to get us started. Before we move into Prevention Institute offering some framing, really for how we're thinking about an ecosystem approach, and then we'll hand it over to our guest presenter before we get to Q&A and share some of the resources that we feel might be useful for you all to take away from this experience and maybe share with your colleagues or build on some of the work that you're probably already championing. So let's try this grounding exercise. And we're really going to use a social ecological model or lens for this. And so feel free to turn your camera off if you want to sit back and close your eyes. If you want to start jotting notes down, we're just going to take a couple of minutes and want to encourage folks to drop some ideas in the chat as we go through this. So we're talking about ecosystems during this session. And one of the ways that most folks are familiar with ecosystems in our field is by using the social ecological model, which we'll introduce a little bit more in a couple slides here. But I wanted to start without necessarily all of the professionalized components of this work and just recognize that we're all parts of ecosystems, we're all parts of communities. And what is one of the best ways to be in community, in my opinion, is a good old-fashioned block party. So I want you to imagine that you are at a block party, and this block party is co-hosted by all of the members of your neighborhood's ecosystem, however that looks to you, whatever that means to you. So thinking about the social ecological model, this could be the teachers and mentors and students, the community-based organizations, small businesses, public agencies like the Parks Department, Public Health Department, whoever might be in that ecosystem. We all know that a process for planning this sort of thing could be quite cumbersome and not necessarily the easiest to navigate, knowing the different roles and goals of organizations, the power dynamics that exist between them. But let's suspend reality, okay? And just imagine that our block party went off without a hitch. So thinking about how every member of our ecosystem may have been, bringing the best of themselves, using their skills and their assets to contribute to our shared goal of the best block party ever. I want us to reflect on which key partners contributed to what to make this block party a success, and how were accountability and reciprocity embedded in the process and execution of this block party. So we'll give you a couple minutes. You can drop stuff in the chat, you can marinate on it, you can just close your eyes and envision the block party. We got some images here to help you do that a little bit, but I'm gonna stay quiet for a minute or two and just let you all think about those things. And I'll see if we can drop those questions in the chat if that's helpful as well.
Yep, I just put them in.
All right, thank you, Zach. So yeah, feel free to start sharing in the chat, ask a clarifying question if you have any. We'll just take maybe 90 more seconds. Right. So I hope folks were imagining the last block party they went to, the next block party they want to go to. If you want to drop something in the chat, you're totally welcome to, but if you just want to keep this for yourself, we honor that as well. And so we can break the ice a little bit with some next questions, but want us to carry forward some of the thoughts that are coming up. For me, I'm thinking about not just how we're going to get to this block party, but how we're developing relationships and how we're supporting accountability and who has access to what, who is gatekeeping what decisions, the permitting process, the sound ordinances. How are we just making it available to support what the community vision for the work might be? So grateful for those of you who dropped some thoughts in the chat. And we want to hear real quick, to what extent do you use a social ecological lens in your work? And we're going to open up a poll. And our very scientific approach to this question is we just want to know, are you not using it at all? Do you use it a little bit, a fair amount, or does it inform everything that you do? And if you're not really sure what a social ecological lens is, then first of all, I apologize for not introducing it, but I thought we could start here just to kind of get a real-time understanding, and then know that we're going to talk about it more. So it's totally okay if it's not something you're already using. Oh my gosh. All right. We're seeing lots of responses come in. We are up to 140 responses. That means there's about 90 folks still waiting to respond. All good. If it's not accessible to you to put your answer in, feel free to drop something in the chat if that's helpful too. I think we'll close the poll maybe in another 15 seconds here if you want to get your answers in. Right, the last couple trickling in. Why don't we can close the poll and maybe share the results with everyone. So let's see. What does this mean? 95% use it at least a little bit. And then what is that? Quick math, like 64%, a fair amount to informs everything we do. Really impressive. So just something we always try to do on these Prevent Connect calls is recognize how much expertise is already in this space. So we encourage y'all to bring some of that to the conversation. So that was close-ended. We want to ask an open-ended question now. How does the social ecological model inform your organization's actions? And that might mean you are developing strategic frameworks around it. It may support measuring outcomes. Just share a little in the chat so we can kind of see how this lens supports your work, and that might be a good jump off for us seeing what an ecosystem lens could support. Right, seeing some answers come in. Zach, I might ask you to read what's coming in from the chat for us.
Sure. It looks like some folks are sharing that it kind of guides development of strategies or priorities, kind of pushes organizations to think beyond just the individual, more outside the box, more community level thinking. It helps with layering strategies, working in cultural context, supports implementation of programs. So lots of great responses coming in. Definitely keep them coming as we continue with our framing and talking more about this model.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. And thank you everyone for the responses. So we got a lot we want to cover before we get to our guest speaker, but she is really the main event here. So we're going to try to move quickly and note that the slides will be shared afterwards and you all can post questions in the chat if we're moving too quickly. And we'll have a Q&A at the end too to address some outstanding questions. So we wanted to frame the value of an ecosystem approach and what we mean by an ecosystem approach. So like we said, we kind of are building off of something a lot of us are already familiar with, the social ecological model. So this is one of the simplest graphics, I think, representing what CDC and many throughout the public health and violence prevention fields see as a foundation for a comprehensive approach. So a lot of the things you just dropped in the chat, I think, really resonate here. And at its most basic, the model is bringing together how the different levels from individual, relational, communal, and societal, how the interplay is impacting outcomes. And so it helps us identify what strategies we want to implement, where we are having the impact we want to see, and how impact is rippling and reverberating across these different levels. And so we're going to continue to draw on the terminology that we see here, ecological, ecology, drawing lessons from the environment and from what surrounds us and how what surrounds us shapes us. So one of our favorite teachers on this concept is a thought leader and author called Adrian Brown. And so she wrote Emergent Strategy, which folks may be familiar with, other seminal work on movement building, radical change, and justice work. I'm seeing someone in the chat saying the best, all caps. So if you haven't been introduced to Adrian Brown, I'm happy to share this quote with you all. In nature, we see so clearly how the healthiest ecosystems thrive in biodiversity. There's so many ways of being, growing, processing sunlight, or as many as there are species. And so no creature or plant in that healthy ecosystem functions as a monopoly or as an individual. They make it as long and as far as they can grow together. So I think, and I'm already seeing some heads nod in the Zoom room here, that we stand a lot to gain from applying an ecosystem lens to public health prevention and equity and racial justice work. And one of the main reasons we felt that this was an important topic to bring to our Prevent Connect community is because we are seeing it everywhere. Folks are talking about, oh, thank you for the, someone is correcting our spelling, appreciating that. We will rectify that. Definitely want to honor folks' names as they write them. So we're noticing that this ecosystem terminology is everywhere. This is just a smattering of some of what we're seeing. We included a couple of different resources over the last several years that are referencing an ecosystem approach. They're talking about it in the context of partnerships, power building, social change, ranging from fields like youth development, Black entrepreneurship, systems level organizing, audiences ranging from activists, educators, organizers, philanthropies, practitioners. So everyone is trying to get in on the ecosystem conversation. We wanted to bring it to this community because we think that the violence prevention community, particularly sexual violence, domestic violence, and intimate partner violence, would benefit from this lens, but also is already using it in many ways. And so we want to draw on those expertises already. So one of the places that we first looked was at an article. You can see it referenced at the bottom there. This is back in 2008 called Cultivate Your Ecosystem. And so in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, these scholars and practitioners who are experts on social entrepreneurship brought some insights on what they were seeing as an ecosystem approach. And they really make the case that in order to create significant and long-lasting changes, we need to understand and often alter the social systems that create and sustain the problems in the first place. And so I think this is going to be very familiar to our entire audience here, because so much of the work that you all already do is community informed, and CDC technical packages offer a lot of guidance on this sort of thing that fits squarely into the social ecological model for upstream systems change and upstream prevention. And so I think what really stood out when we started digging into this work was seeing that they're emphasizing altering systems, not just navigating them, that they're talking about a wide range of forces that are impacting individuals and communities and the policies, and the importance of understanding historic through lines that create systems of oppression and multi-generational inequities. And so, of course, it's also valuable for us to be looking at the rapidly evolving political, economic, physical, and cultural environments. So all things that we think really inform an ecosystem approach. As I said, people are describing it different ways. We wanted to put our spin on it. And I think some of my colleagues have heard other folks describe this empire organization approach. So I am definitely not claiming it. In fact, I just want to call in the work that we're pulling on that draws on nonprofit industrial complex concepts that were championed by Incite, which is a network of radical feminists of color organizing to end state violence and violence in our homes and communities. And I just wanted to name that for multiple reasons, but one is just a testament to how much innovation and leadership comes from our field, violence prevention, our little corner of the public health realm. So wanted to share how they point out power holders often use nonprofits or service delivery organizations, typically encouraging them to move away from a social movement style, pushing them towards a more capitalistic business style structure, not challenging those structures. And so what does this look like? Empire approach, as we're calling it, encourages organizations to focus on continuously growing, expanding its reach, expanding its budget, prioritizing beating out competition so that they're ensuring we're getting the grant, we're the ones that are offering the most services, the most touch points for our clients. Power imbalances are obviously present in this style of change work or service delivery prevention work. And we navigate power imbalances, and we achieve our goals when necessary, partner if we can, all while being aware that there are power dynamics at play, versus how we see an ecosystem approach, really prioritizing how we create solutions for a collective purpose. How can everyone in our ecosystem thrive, be in harmony? So instead of navigating power, we are asserting that we need to address power to ensure that it's not unjustly tipping scales. And again, I don't think this is new to a lot of folks. I think we're just wanting to name it because we often see that power is not a component of the frameworks or the decision-making that happens in a lot of the violence prevention work that we're participating in. And so we think all of this is easier said than done, and it's a nice ideal, but there are many practicalities that may feel unattainable. So we just wanted to kind of point one of those out. We know that folks often reference the challenges of working across silos or working within silos, and we get caught in the loops and the patterns. Often we have low bandwidth, heavy workloads, or very specific outcomes and goals based on the work that we need to do, that we have grant funding to do. And so using the refrain of breaking down silos, we're now seeing more motivation across the field to not just break down silos, but to work across them and navigate them and understand that we can build something in the absence of silos, which is our ecosystem. And so we have learned a lot from an organization called Network Weaving Institute. And they are experts on partnership and collaboration, and they're talking about how to connect across silos, helping partners better understand each other, better hold each other accountable, and have reciprocity in how they're supporting efforts that go beyond the four walls of their agencies. And so we think this framing fits really nicely within the ecosystem approach because it's encouraging different actors across different organizations to forge meaningful, reciprocal, accountable relationships. And we know that silos have produced the current status quo. We know that they can hold inequities in place. And so network weaving, and as you see these folks tightrope walking across silos, we're trying to bridge gaps to undo some of the status quos that are supporting the current inequities. So my quick question before we go into more of a power analysis framing is, what components of this ecosystem orientation are resonating for you? And what components maybe aren't resonating for you? What feels ideological or theoretical? And what elements feel present in the partnerships you have already? So please drop some responses in the chat or any questions that may be coming up for you. Give it about 30 seconds, and Zach, feel free, call out anything you're seeing in there that's really standing out to you as it comes in.
Sure, I think already seeing it resonate with some folks, the building bridges between silos, working across them, some questions about ways that power gets addressed and the difference between acknowledging a power dynamic and actually working to address that dynamic. Some more resonating around working better together, creating collective value solutions via the ecosystem approach instead of just navigating issues through an empire and organization focus. Acknowledgement that it can feel slow to address power dynamics. It's difficult to be patient in the face of injustice. I like that. Thanks for these responses.
Yes. Oh, so much insight in here. Really grateful for y'all sharing some of your thoughts. And we totally welcome the criticisms or sort of questions that are arising, like, well, what does this look like in practice, and what experiences do folks have with this sort of thing? So I'm seeing a lot come in. Also, I'm just going to acknowledge it's my first time seeing some of the Zoom updates. I saw someone heart one of the messages, so encouraging y'all to respond to each other and like the comments that are really standing out to you. So Now we have a little bit of an understanding of what Prevention Institute means when we say ecosystem, and how it's sort of having overlaps but differences with the more dominant frame of partnerships. So we want to understand and activate power within our ecosystems. And one of the places we start with here is we already talked about having a power analysis, and it's really one of the key distinctions between business as usual and what we're calling an ecosystem approach. So we often talk about applying a race, a gender, a class lens, other intersectional lenses. And I think we need to plainly see how power is at play in our partnerships and in the way we relate to funders, to community leaders, community members, service recipients, survivors. So how is power at play? And that is the starting point. Of course, the process for understanding and activating power may not be the same for everyone or every organization. Particularly, we're going to talk about power building organizations and their role in this work. And so we want to understand, how can we as public health and violence prevention practitioners support power building, but also understanding that power sharing is maybe an important step to getting there. And I just want to call on a comment I'm seeing too, acknowledging the white supremacy dominant culture characteristics at play is also so important, and someone else is naming that too. So in terms of when I say like the dominant style of partnerships, we know that all of this exists within frameworks and processes within a white supremacy culture. And so knowing that we can approach an ecosystem style of partnership and funding and strategic development and action that bucks the tradition of white supremacy culture is super valuable for this work in power building. And so we're not saying by showing this slide that you move from one to the next, but we're just trying to demonstrate how these build off of one another. And we wanted to just share a resource that has been useful for us in understanding how power analysis can be implemented. I'm not going to go through each of the steps just for the sake of time, but knowing that power analysis is a tool and a process that helps us begin to understand. So not have all the understanding, but begin to understand how power currently sits within relationships and communities. And so by investigating the individuals and the organizations who have power, we can get a sense of where the power imbalances are and how decisions can be made and partnerships can be developed to get to the root causes of why there are inequities in outcomes in the first place. And so we're definitely going to share this resource, but I'll keep us moving because I want us to talk a little bit about power building. And so our best teacher in the power building realm at this point, we look to this lead local work. And there's a series of articles developed by these folks, and one of them is linked here. But we just wanted to read the quote here saying that community power building organizations work within an ecosystem. And it's other community organizing groups and actors who offer a range of assets, including research, advocacy, policy, and legal support to build power along multiple sectors and use diverse methods. For the ecosystem to be effective, experiences show that building and organizing a base or constituency is the heart of the work and therefore must be at the center. And so the value of an ecosystem approach is that it's encouraging a power lens across partnerships. It's not enough to understand how power exists to analyze power, but how to activate it and how to align our partners and our resources across the shared goals and purposes that we have that are bigger than any one organization. So starting from a foundation of power analysis, this sets us up to support power building. And again, we're not saying our health departments or our RPE work is the best position necessarily to do the power building, but how can we understand power dynamics and support achieve our goals of safety and prevention to ensure that there is no inequities in the outcomes and that there is equitable and racial justice oriented processes for creating the communities we want to see. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Zach, who's going to round out some of this content on power building.
Thanks, Will. So yeah, we were wanting to look at what's happening in the field around using that ecosystem approach to build power, and came across this report from the California Endowment and the Center for the Study of Social Policy. And this report was kind of a collection of their learnings from their Building Healthy Communities initiative, which involved partnerships and leadership across 14 different communities, as well as state and regional partnerships. And from that work, they kind of came up with this working definition of a power ecosystem, which is the network of organizations, relationships, and infrastructure necessary to ensure that people who have been historically marginalized have voice and agency to create an inclusive democracy and close health equity gaps. So we really enjoyed this definition and looked through this report and found that they put together these kind of 6 elements of what they're calling a power ecosystem framework. As you can see here, it's a focus on community and grassroots organizing, shared values and analysis, relationship building, infrastructure, and then things that they're calling composition and capacities. And we'll go into these a little bit more detail on the next slides. So for community and grassroots organizing, they found that centering community-led efforts, grassroots organizing entities was super key because they're deeply rooted hubs with trusted community members. They focus on multi-issue initiatives, and they uplift power sharing and community-led leadership. So they found that these types of organizations are really key to using a power ecosystem framework in communities. And then the shared values and analysis they talked about are those beliefs that are grounded in things like equity and racial justice that allow for organizations or groups to coalesce around issues in the first place and work towards shared action. And then relationships they thought about as both the individual and social ties within and between organizations or partners that kind of help folks figure out where alignment is across those shared values. And then moving into the infrastructure part, these are the forums, coalitions, alliances, communication channels that facilitate information sharing, collaboration, and joint action. So this is kind of just the larger network of players and the ways that communication and data flow between organizations and within communities, and looking at that to see where's power flowing within that and how can we influence the infrastructure in a way to divert or build power in places where it doesn't normally gather. And then for composition, it's both the organizational makeup as well as diversity and population makeup of an entire power ecosystem. So not just intra-organizational, but across the community as well. And then finally, they talk about capacities as a final element of a power ecosystem framework, which includes the skills, the knowledge, and resources needed in a power ecosystem to develop and implement all sorts of systems change strategies and to ultimately build power among those who have been systematically divested from or had power taken from them. So they also had these questions that they asked themselves about how do we maintain a thriving power ecosystem? Kind of what are these actionable ways that we can build power and use an ecosystem approach to kind of maintain the power that we've built or shared. So they really found that those shared values and analysis that are bringing organizations together around a shared purpose are key to keeping those partnerships and collaborations alive. And furthermore, they kind of characterize these sorts of lasting relationships as more transformational rather than transactional. So it's less that an organization partners or comes together with their own separate agendas just for the sake of one small project or grant, and then they go about their separate ways back into silos, and more of a focus on how do we create a longer lasting collaborative effort that results in power sharing and power building. They acknowledge again that grassroots organizing groups are a critical component of ecosystems because of their multi-issue nature. and their emphasis on multiracial community-based networks and community leadership. And they also found that thriving power ecosystems have the ability to adapt and anticipate different issues and leverage and build on losses in order to maintain the health of a power ecosystem. We also wanted to share this image called the Power Flower from a related University of Southern California report. And it centers organizing and base building groups as important to power building within an ecosystem, but also acknowledges that those are not the only elements. So it's not that in order to participate in a power ecosystem, you have to identify as an organizing or base building group or organization, but all these other elements come into play. So advocacy, policy, research and legal, alliances, coalitions, you can see them all here. All of these elements and players kind of come together in this power flower to make a thriving power ecosystem. Diverse capacities, skills, and expertise is all really key here. So we'd like you to kind of think back to that silo image that Will had shared in conjunction with this power flower, and think about how does this shift your perspective on partnerships, silos, or collective efforts. So we know this was a lot to talk through, but just wanted to leave you all as practitioners with the acknowledgement that you all have a vital role in this work. And so we wanted to bring back that silo image. In light of the power flower and some of what we discussed, are there things about this image you relate to, challenges that you've faced, ways that you've navigated those challenges, and ways that you might be thinking about? So I have a question in the chat around the narrative change pedal. Yes, so here in the communications, cultural and narrative change, this is an acknowledgement, I think, that some of those groups or leaders that are focusing on narrative change, communications are thinking about ways that to kind of upset the status quo about who traditionally has the power to tell stories, who in communities is having their voice or story taken from them, and ways to kind of shift that power and voice back to those in communities who have that lived experience and leadership knowledge. Great. So yeah, as you think about this question, feel free to drop some answers in the chat. And if you see anything coming up, we can talk through some of what's coming up for folks before we transition.
Nothing coming in the chat just yet, Zach, but really grateful for your overview of those power building concepts. Beginning to see some stuff come in. Oh no. Thank you for sharing, Rhonda. Rhonda says, sometimes I'm on the couch just waiting for the umbrella people to fall. And something Zach, I think maybe you mentioned earlier, is like, it looks dangerous up there. And I'm sure it doesn't seem safe to be going between these silos, and certainly not for the cows beneath. So thanks for that, Rhonda. I am certain that's not a fair representation of you and your work, but appreciating that. I think we'll let the responses flow in. I'm going to try to respond to some in the chat, but maybe we can move to our next slide to introduce our guest speaker, who I'm sure everyone's really excited to get to connect with.
Wonderful. So yeah, we wanted to take the chance to introduce Dr. Iona Harrison, who's a senior research associate with Urban Institute. She'll have the chance to introduce herself and dive into some of the work that she's been involved in with Urban Institute. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you whenever you're ready.
Great, I'm ready to go. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. And I saw some people saying their first webinar of the year. This is my first one as well. So give me some grace. But I'm actually really excited to talk to you all because you seem so engaged in the chat and are so knowledgeable already. So I may have some questions for you, but I am going to spend some time talking about the PASS project. So it stands for Promoting Adolescent Sexual Health and Safety. So it's a project that it's been going on for some time at Urban. It precedes me. It's had many iterations, but I'll get to that point. I just really wanted to highlight today I'm going to focus on like building upon what Will and Zach shared. So really speaking to community partnerships and power sharing. Next slide, please. Yes, so a little bit more about myself. Iona Harrison, Iona's fine. My pronouns are she and she, or hers. And I am a senior research associate at the Urban Institute. Not sure if that means anything to anybody, but beyond that, I do care a great deal about young people, women, and health equity. So as such, my work largely focuses on sexual and reproductive well-being and community resilience strategies. So for me, that's like food insecurity, among other things. But I joined Urban because they had so many opportunities for me to grow my portfolio in these spaces, but they also had an emerging community engaged methods team that since the time I joined 5 years ago, recently just became a resource center. So regardless of my research topic, I always apply a community engaged lens. Whenever possible, but you'll see today I'm going to like focus in on a little bit about how sometimes there's some give and some take, what's appropriate given resources or other limitations, and like what you can do from a community engaged standpoint. But I am going to share a lot about the method that I apply and then use the PASS program to really like situate some of that advice. And I do want to share that although we've done this work, we didn't do it all perfectly, to the point that I'm hearing with folks talking about, it's scary, doing that tightrope. It is, you got to get your toes wet. So even if you're seasoned and someone who has been doing this for years, you're inevitably going to be met with challenges, and just handle it with grace, give yourself space. You're going to learn. The reason to do this isn't to share and give all that you have. I mean, it's that, but it's also for you to learn as well. So it's definitely a learning process. And I'm gonna not take too much time for that, and we're gonna jump right in. Feel free to throw any questions in the chat. If I see them, I'll try to answer them, but I'm gonna try to hold space for Q&A after as well. So we're gonna spend some time, again, talking about community partnerships and power sharing. But I'm going to elaborate on some of the partnering with community, because partnering with community can look so many different ways and mean so many different things. But when I say partnering with community, I'm thinking more about like building, evaluating, or implementing, fill in the blank, like as you would do with any colleague or other expert in the field. But of course, when working with community, there are going to be some key differences to how you approach the partnership. So today I'm going to do my best to like walk through what initiating these may look like, and then highlight some of the importance and value added to doing these things. So with that, I'm going to, of course, give a deeper overview of PASS. I'm also going to walk through some of the pieces that I think are important to this work, a little beyond just the partnership part, but like how do you develop the partnership and why it's important for like buy-in, sustainability, all those great things. So let's talk a little bit about PASS. So PASS is it's a lot. It's a large project. It's a community-based teen sexual health and safety program. And when I say sexual health and safety, like we cover all topics. So that's like making life plans, focusing on personal power, healthy relationships, youth development, parent-child communication, bystander behavior, contraception, and like so many more. So there's like 10 separate sessions. They cover a couple different topics. Young people meet once a week, but the unique part about the PASS program is that community has been embedded throughout most, if not all, parts of it. So it is built with and for Black young people ages 13 to 19 living in public and or near public housing. So DC Housing Authority is one of our partners, and we've been working among, I want to say, close to 12 different properties and communities and neighborhoods. But it's also beyond being built with a community, it's also a little deeper because it's actually implemented with community. So we have a few different community facilitators who implement the program. So we built this curriculum together, and then we being community, urban, so many folks, which I'll get into a little later. So we built the curriculum and it also implemented with community. So with that, know that it gets messy in all that we do. Next slide, please. Great. So this graphic is a pretty timeline. It's much cleaner than what it was living it, but it's a nice timeline. I do want to set the table because I want to acknowledge that like PASS had multiple streams of funding, and the partnerships have been going on since 2011. So that's a long time. That's deeper than usually like the typical 1 year touch points. Having funding in general, let alone multiple streams, like I do want to acknowledge that time and resources are a major determining factor for like what type of partnership you can do. So we've been blessed in that way. But you'll see that like we have these different ways of thinking about how PASS was developed. There's the partnership, framing, developing, piloting, sustainability, all these things. And oh, maybe you go back one more. Thank you. All these things, but partnership is at the top because we really truly had to invest a lot in this part. And although it's only at the top, please know that there were multiple times that we had to go back, build new partnerships. If something happened and there was some strain, making sure we addressed that issue. So partnership is throughout this entire thing, not only at the top. So I did want to focus a little bit on that. So we are going to talk about like who we're partnering with, how you figure out who those people are, the different types of agreements that go into place. It really took a lot of time. So although it says 1 year there, it mostly was 2 years. So it was also like figuring out who to partner with. Once we had those partnerships in place, who was missing. I think that's a really important part that can often be left out. You have people at the table, you're making some great moves and have great ideas and energy, but you really want to make sure that you aren't leaving anyone out, especially someone who's going to help move that goal forward. So we took a lot of time building that partnership and then being very transparent about what it looked like to build an agreement, putting some safeguards in place to protect folks as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, as well as compensating when possible. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on laying the groundwork for those community partnerships in my next few slides. Yes. Thank you. So this is going to be, it's a lot. So I really like this graphic because it does break down a lot of the messiness of laying the groundwork for community partnerships. And I'm going to say this a lot, like any image you see, please know, pretty or not, it is probably better than what it was living through it. Like it is just something that it can be a struggle and you got to like find the beauty in it. So long as you're, moving with some intentions and intentionality, you'll end on top, I promise. But here breaks it down in 4 different ways. So the first one is like considering how you're going to work to achieve equity. And that doesn't mean like your larger programmatic goals or research goals, whatever that means. It's really about how do you ensure that all your partners who are at the table have the power to make decisions, resources to make those decisions, what is needed to be put in place to support folks being able to fully contribute to what you're doing or fully just be able to assert and have agency. You really want to think through these things. We did quite a few different exercises to do this because we had so many different partners, and I'll show you all the partners we had in a second, one of them being DCHA, so the DC's Housing Authority, and then also partnering very closely with one of the communities that is a part of DCHA. So how do you ensure that when you bring folks to a table and, we're thinking up and dreaming up of what the it is together, what we're going to do and how we're going to move, and you have essentially your landlord at the table and someone who you may feel isn't showing up in the way community needs, or someone you may feel that has done you wrong, or you may have a citation or things like that. So how do you make sure those things are either taking off the table so folks can really engage fully, or addressed head on so that there isn't this elephant in the room? And for myself as a researcher, very much understanding the friction historically and then contemporary, to be honest, those like extractive practices that researchers have with marginalized communities, making sure that you yourself are showing up and taking stock of intentions. You're going to have to like really be able to answer the tough questions, be open. Folks are going to ask you questions, rightfully so. The same people may ask you the same questions over and over again. Answer it every time. Do not feel away. Answer it every time. That's what I say. Answer it every time. If your answer changes and folks feel away about the changing your answer, again, just be transparent. I'm sure that if you're doing this work up front and you're being intentional, that you're not trying to project harm, but you got to understand that folks have been hurt. So there's some trauma-informed practices that you want to put in place. So you may be interrogated by the same person over and again, or the same groups of people or new people, and just be ready and maybe think through what exercises can be done. I mean, don't script it. That is not what you want to do. You don't want to come off as scripted, but you do want to have these conversations with yourself and your team before approaching this work a little bit more deeply. The second piece here is that you want to build in mechanisms and processes for transparency and accountability. Two key words, transparency and accountability. Transparency is a core value that I have. If you don't have the answer, just say you don't have the answer. Like, folks are not going to be mad at you saying, I don't know, especially if you say, I don't know, but I will find out. Like, I have never had anyone get upset with me about that. And if they do, it's like, hey, I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm still going to get that information and bring it back to you. But here for us in the context of past, it was very important for us to think about transparency and accountability, because we essentially had a funder that put out a call for proposals to do a community-based participatory research project. A lot of words. If you don't know what that means, essentially it's truly what we did, worked with community to build a thing. And for that, we had to be very transparent about what the request for proposal asks for. There's check-in points that, we have to do with the program officer. There's questions and tasks that we essentially have to do. We have to work towards these goals, and they may be not aligned with community. So how can you assure that you're being transparent, sharing what the boxes that need to be checked are, but also leaving space for folks to say, I'm uncomfortable with that, or I'm okay with this piece, but not that piece, or where do we have wiggle room there? Making sure that every time or every point that you aren't taking things for granted or face value, acknowledge what the goals are, acknowledge who the funders are, acknowledge who's making the decisions, and then work together to really have those shared goals to get you past that. That's how PASS was able to continue since 2011. And I can elaborate on that more if folks have questions, but I do want to keep forward with these other two. So the other is to do your homework on community history. Always do your homework. You do not, and I mean this in various ways, like you don't want to engage with a partner and not understand like what their mission and goals are, what work they may have done previously, what work they're doing now. If you don't have those answers, you can't find it online, do a meeting, ask these questions, informational meeting to really understand where their goals are so you can align them with the work or the acts that you have. Another thing is to be honest with yourself. I am at a large institution and we are in DC. So many folks could have already worked with a partner that I'm trying to reach out to. You want to leverage those partnerships if they're great, but also be honest with yourself that it could potentially be that something went not too well. And you want to make sure that you're reaching out, having had being privy to that background or some of that friction. So you're not, again, reaching out to someone and making the same mistakes or not acknowledging the difference in approach that you're going to take. Meeting with community leaders, please do it. Of course you want to do it. These are the gatekeepers to community, rightfully so. These are the people who are going to make sure that, you are who you are and what you say who you are and what you're going to do before you even see community. This is a good way to see and gauge what's the interest here. What are the things that folks are in the community already say are priorities for them? What are some points of contention? How do we avoid these? Is this something community wants? And again, after meeting with community leaders, there are some others you want to meet with, because you do want to, again, to that piece of like who's not present. Oftentimes in community work, the same people are like pulled on and tapped over and over again. And this is great because people are doing great work, but you also want to acknowledge that others may be getting passed off or looked over, who are doing the work and you want in the space with you. So again, taking this context from past, there were points where we had to bring in new partners and different partners to fill different gaps, but also being very intentional as we had a strong group working together for some time, and acknowledging that bringing in someone new essentially shifts some things, but how can we ensure there's alignment? Yeah, so this here buy-in, I'm sure these blue bubbles you all probably seen, but it's based on Cheryl Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation, but it matches very well up against like the continuum for community engaged methods. And for me, I mean, this essentially just shows that there's more than one way to do community engaged methods. There's so many different approaches. And then depending on what activities you already have in place, there can be some low-hanging fruit. So as much as I like to encourage people to do things as fully collaborative and with partnership as possible, I do want to acknowledge that, again, time, resources, other constraints such as infrastructure may make it that you have to do one or the other. But to quickly touch on these, inform, for me, I think happens throughout any community engaged methods work. This alone can be like community members informing research questions, or again, I'm a researcher, so apologies. Research questions, what the, I guess, time even that you're gonna have a program or what a service should be paired with, things like that. And then consult can be community input on, like, for example, survey questions. That happens a lot with the research that I do. So what is asked, how it's asked, language that's used, or you can even do like pilot test runs. This could be a pilot program, but this could be a test run where folks are taking surveys and like really saying, okay, this feels like the wrong language. I don't think, like, for example, young people will understand this. This survey feels too long. All the things that we did with PASS and found out that our survey was very long, and young people may or may not felt comfortable answering certain questions because of how they were asked and things like that. So we did a lot of back and forth with changing our survey instrument based on consulting with community. Involve, again, I think also happens a lot with community engaged methods, but this can be assisting with administration or implementation. As I said earlier, PASS, we have it that the structure is that a community facilitator is implementing the curriculum, and that there can be done for a program. You can also do this, for example, going back to research hat, is that administration. Oftentimes, like, community knows who the key stakeholders are. They know where residents convene, but they truly know, like, some of the reservations that folks may have and how to navigate them. So that can help you reach the intended audience. So even if you're involving community in a small piece, it's very important to be intentional, because you really can get a bigger, better response, or meet more folks, or have greater buy-in from these type of steps. And collaborate and empower are very similar. It's just working together and drafting, disseminating, analyzing, all the things, just like really doing this more involved partnership where you're going to be sharing some of that power and thinking through what the decision is made, who's going to do what, and why we're choosing someone to do X, Y, Z. So all of that is kind of together, but I think the difference between collaborate and empower is that you're really investing into community in a way where this can be done without you. You're essentially working yourself out of a job. I say that all the time. So yeah, I can talk more about those, but I think that this continuum just works so well for so many reasons. And as a researcher, I use it over and over again to kind of encourage people that there are so many different ways to do community engaged methods. It sounds scary. It is scary, but the scarier part is that, like, you don't know what you're getting into. So just like take a chance, take a step. And some of that low hanging fruit is some of the earlier ones, like inform and consult. Yeah, so quickly, not to harp too much on this slide here. So we had quite a few partners for PASS. As you'll see, the different groups and buckets that they work into, you'll see those in blue, and then in gray, you'll see the actual names of the individuals, and then in yellow, you'll see who served in what capacity. Honestly, what I want to focus on here is that this is how PASS operated, but I want to ask myself this question, which I believe either Will or Zach encouraged me to ask myself this question about how this would look different, or the PASS program would look different if community was at the center of all of this. You'll see community is a little off to the side. They do engage in all these pieces, but I actually have worked on a program in East Baltimore where community is at the center, and so different, very similar approaches to, doing the power sharing and some of the activities we do, but very different because this isn't a researcher or a funder or anyone else coming to community and saying, this is what we have. It's community saying, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is how we see it moving forward, and really being the driver, as they should be, for change in their community. So I think that PASS may have not even been PASS. Who knows? I know that during the time that we did PASS, a lot of other community external factors came up. So I could only imagine some of the work that would have been built and the curriculums that would have been shaped. if community was in the center of all of this. So wanting you all to take any, I guess, org charts that you have and thinking through how things would look differently if community was at the center, because it was powerful for me to even think through it myself. Yes, next slide. So impact, again, I keep saying very high level of some things about past, but impact. So community being involved in the way they were for past made it that we had a larger impact. Again, we were in almost 12 different communities doing this work. I can't remember the number of young people that we reached, but we also were having a larger impact beyond just some of those metrics that I described in the topics we covered. We were doing youth development. We were investing in young people. As you see in the picture, I believe this will be to your left, the young people, these two had interest in creating music, and this was something that the past program thought was smart intentionally to invest in, because if we weren't going to meet the young people and their needs beyond, or their desires and likes beyond what we thought was past the program, we weren't going to be able to keep them engaged. They weren't going to come back every week. They weren't going to feel like we cared about them. And I promise you that that lesson goes beyond just the young people. It's something you want to do with your partners as well. When building those partnerships, really taking time to understand, what are your partner's goals? What is the work that they're doing? What are they interested in? How are they trying to develop? Do they have a strategic plan for the next year? And what can you do, if possible, to help them get there? Even if it's out of line from the funding or the scope of work that you had in mind, your partnership will be much deeper. Any relationship where there's reciprocity, it's going to be a better partnership, and it's going to have a deeper impact. I can't tell you how many young people that, even being a researcher, when I arrived, they were excited to see me. When I arrived, they would ask me questions. They would ask me questions about so many things. Like, I was just last Friday in one of the communities that we worked in, and multiple young people like, hey, we haven't seen you in a while, ask me different questions. We have young people going to college and wanting to know a little bit more about their options. So as much as you can invest in the intended audience or your partners beyond the scope of work that you've built for yourself, the better. It's going to be a deeper impact. Folks are going to want to continue a partnership on other things, and it just feels a little better. It's a better relationship. I can't think of any other way to say it. Next slide, please. Yes. So sustainability, I think it's inherent, but the sustainability piece, I don't think there's any way we could have sustained this program for as long as we have. It even still, although the funding has ended, it's still ongoing in a smaller way, with our partners still building this work and taking ownership of the program and finding ways to either tailor it a little bit. I mean, 10 weeks, a session every week, that was a little bit much for folks. So they have tailored it a little bit for their own use or embedded it into other programs they're doing. We would not have been able to achieve true sustainability without investing in our community-based organizations. So I keep saying we worked in these 12 communities, but we, Urban Institute, worked through our community-based organizations. So we made it our business to identify folks who were already doing youth development, who were already doing some type of programming in their communities, trusted sources to do this work. And we were able to, of course, compensate them, provide funds for them to continue to do the work that they're doing, in addition to adding on paths to their work. But also we partner with them beyond that, like finding operation grants and partnering with them to apply for other grants there and things like that. It really helped with us building and investing and making it a point that we all had this shared goal. So we got to a point after a few years in where the community organizations was like, we got this. Like, we'll check in with you when we need to. We know when surveying happens, we'll see you at the survey. And there was like really little involvement as the year went on with Urban being a part of this, because that was the point from the start, to really, again, work ourselves out of a job. We only wanted to be able to create something with partners and then remove ourselves and still be, of course, this resource on the outside, but not having to be in the front seat. And that I can't tell you. There's a link here. Hopefully we can put it in the chat. This link is to one of our most recent posts about the work and like why it's so important to invest in these community-based organizations and like why it's crucial for sustainability. Yes, so I am running down on time, but I have a couple slides left, I promise. And this is key consideration. So there are a couple things you want to take into place. And I do want to like state again from the researcher standpoint that this is just some of the things that came up for me and my team as we are researchers working in communities. So yes, oh, is this out of place? I'm sorry, will he hit all of them? I think mine are a little, yep. Sorry about that, they're out of place, the things, but before you start any of this work, asking yourself, like, what's the motivation for seeking community partnership? Not saying you don't do it, just saying, like, have that clear idea. Check yourself of like, okay, why am I trying to do community partnerships again? I have many reasons. If you can't answer the question, I got you. I'll give you a few. But you really want to make sure that there's alignment with your goals, your organization sometimes. And I will say, it's not always alignment. My team and my organization, there was some friction as well. So there's that. But you also want to make sure you have these questions answered before you arrive to have this conversation with a community member to do a partnership, because they're going to ask you, what do you want? Why are you here? These motivations are key in this type of work. Also thinking, is there a benefit to communities doing this work? Like, it can be burdensome to add certain things onto a community member, making sure that you're offering options. Like if you have this grand idea for a community-based participatory research or any type of work in vetting community, like think through the different options, like lay it out. This isn't the end all be all. This isn't the one way, but how comfortable do you feel jumping in and playing a role here? How comfortable, or what's your capacity playing a role here? So giving folks options is very key. And then like how much time and how many resources do you have? Again, I showed y'all in the image, like we were able to bring in some funding to ensure that we can do this work. We were able to secure folks who had the time and interest to do this work. So it takes time. Every step of a community engaged process takes time. I'm not gonna lie about that. It is time consuming, but all for good reason, all for a great benefit. And then as a researcher, like how flexible are you to like survey question development? I know as a quantitative researcher on top of that myself, that folks can get really caught up in like the status quo of like, this question has to be asked this way and it's replicable and it's been tested and all those other things. Great. If you do not want to change that question, make sure you communicate that it's non-negotiable, but also I encourage you to check yourself about that question. Just because it's been done the same way over and over again does not mean it needs to keep up that way. So be open, but also be honest and share with folks where it's like, okay, I feel like I can't budge on these questions and why. And that's also a teaching moment. It's a learning moment because we want community to be able to assert that with us as well. So if you can think through that as well. And then infrastructure in general, but infrastructure for sharing back information. As a researcher collecting data, I always want to give that data back to the people who gave it to me because it's theirs. So think about what the infrastructure is for that. Sometimes you may have to build some things for it. And then back to infrastructure, consider your organization's infrastructure. For example, the Urban Institute has really evolved in the time that I've been there doing this work because of the community engaged methods work that we had to push on certain items, given different constraints. Like not everyone has a 501c3. Certain people can't be reimbursed. How do you pay folks up front? All these type of things. And then does your budget support additional deliverables? As a researcher, I'm so used to folks writing up, very long white papers and they have all these technical terms in them, but like, how can we ensure that these deliverables are going to be something that community can use and, use to meet their own goals? And what does that need to look like? Who does that need to get in the hands of? So doing that in partnership with community is key. And then one last slide. Key lessons learned. So again, I kind of talked about this with the context. So there were a lot of things happening outside of PASS because we were working in community that sometimes took precedent. So we would pause, we would pivot a little bit, we would have community conversations around items and always wanting to try to like link those back, of course, to the work that we're doing, but knowing when it doesn't need to be linked back. So there were times, oftentimes community violence, and like folks are focusing on that, and we need to make space, and also thought about like how in our mind, this like 10-week program every week doesn't fit so well when people have real life things. So that was a big lesson learned. So even though I said it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of time. And also you want to build room for wiggle. So like always add more time, just always. The value of employing community facilitators. So we had many conversations going up front with like who we wanted to implement the program. And the value for me was that beyond just this trusted source, that the young people felt like they had someone they can depend on. Every person we talked to, every community facilitator spoke about how their work goes beyond the once a week check-in time with PASS. Like folks can come to them whenever they need them and may have never had someone before this. So that was, for me, as someone who cares a great deal about young people, unmatched, priceless. Again, about the flexibility. So you want to allow for flexibility in your curriculum and trainings, because for us, we built this program and at the time it was just so pointed. And now over time, we've learned a lot about how some of our verbiage or words or ideas were outdated, and how can you make sure that you're being responsive to the needs of that day. So updating things, moving around, shaking things out, and really listening to community and young folks. Like when the young people tell you we don't like this and this needs to be changed, do it. And then lastly, we did a lot of TA around data collection and evaluation. This meant a lot for us because with the work that we were doing, entering only for surveys, it was like, okay, this feels great. We're a little far removed, but at the same time, data collection, sensitive questions, community members, after we did some training with them, they were able to get better numbers and response rates than we did. So making sure that you're also investing in community. Again, this is the third time I'm going to say it, work yourself out of a job. Give your skills, provide your resources, teach folks so they can do it on their own. And then lastly, investing in the time to create those meaningful partnerships is really going to be key if you can do that beyond like the scope and task at hand. So I'm not sure, I believe that's my last slide. Oh, it's not.
No, you're all good, Iona. We are gonna do the Q&A after.
Gotcha. I would say that.
We want to give you an opportunity to not leave any cliffhangers for folks. I'm sure they're excited to hear what's going on with PASS now.
Yes, and I'll try to answer best as I can, y'all.
No, I mean, I would love to hear more on this slide if you want to share with us kind of what the next steps are, and I'm sure that will inform people's questions too, if you're open to it.
Absolutely. Again, this is me pulling from a lot of stuff that I already said, but myself, Sasha Bruce here, this name is actually our core community facilitator that was instrumental in employing a lot of the community facilitators. We wanted to make sure that a community-based organization was employing them, although we were subcontracting with Sasha Bruce. We wanted to have that extra layer of protection where community felt like they could, say that they didn't like something or XYZ, or be able to have this, like, I'm not talking to the funder or the prime, and be really transparent. So that was really great. But Sasha Bruce and us, we were able to send out this like wide stretch of like, who is interested in DC in learning or implementing PASS. So we sent out that call, got a lot of folks who were interested, and did trainings. Like last year, it was just like training about PASS, answering questions, packaging resources, posting them online, giving them to the partners, the new partners who wanted to implement this work, and really trying our best to make sure all the lessons learned have been given. So with that, Sasha Bruce still does PASS. We have a few different community members who are implementing PASS in their programs, as well as like continuing funding partnerships with some of our other smaller community-based organizations to ensure that they can do the work that they want to do, even if that is beyond PASS. So those are what we've been doing. We've packaged a lot of things. If you go on our Urban website, you'll see that there's a PASS landing page, tons of stuff.
All right. Well, I think I'm already seeing a couple questions come in the chat. We wanted to pose a couple questions too. So As Prevention Institute asks Iona to just kind of elaborate on some of what we just heard, really in conversation with the concepts, we started with inviting everyone else to start dropping some questions into the chat. So we would love to get to your questions. Zach has been tracking some questions that came earlier, and we'll just take a couple minutes to look at these questions we formulated before this session started. So Iona, wanted to hear in your own words what individual and organizational skills supported you in being an effective part of your community's ecosystem for safety.
That's a lot. It's a good question. Individual and organizational. I appreciate the individual question here because personally, I didn't share this earlier, but I'm from Philadelphia. I'm from Philly. I saw a lot of Pennsylvania folks in the building. So shout out to y'all. And individually, I feel like I have empathy that inherently came from my lived experience that has allowed me to support being an effective part of that ecosystem because it allows me to check when even my own organization, I feel like is doing wrong or isn't getting things, but also towing that line to understand that like, yes, you have that lived experience, but you don't have the lived experience of the communities that you're interfacing. Mm-hmm. So making sure that I know when to step back. So I usually try to do this liaise role where I'm like, you know, listening a lot to community, but also trying to buck back against my own organization.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful for that reflection, and the empathy and compassion clearly comes through. So grateful that you bring that to this work. I see a couple questions in the chat, but we'll just maybe ask you this one more. Where do you see your work in this Power Flower? And I already have my guess, but I'm also curious, where do you see your key partners in the power ecosystem?
Awesome. That's how I was going to answer this. So of course, research, not the legal part, but research and legal. I feel like I do a great job of engaging with like the organizational development, infrastructure, and funders. So I do a lot of TA work, so also changing my own organization, but I do a lot of TA work, sharing some of my lessons learned with other organizations who are trying to get their teams on board. Advocacy and policy, 100%. I would love to do more work and and leadership development, but I would really much like to do more work around like the cultural and narrative change. I feel like we are becoming more knowing of how and better, I think, we being humans at treating folks. But again, it is a learning process and things feel like they change every day. So I would love to be a part of understanding how we can change and shift some narratives. And I feel like that's like the first step to really getting some people through the door because we use similar language. Sometimes we don't. Folks hold on to certain words and they may hinder if they feel like this makes them, if they fit in this space with others. So as much as I could work with people in that pedal, I would love to.
Definitely. All right. You heard the call to action, everyone. If you are in the communications, cultural, and narrative change pedal, reach out to Iona. And definitely saw some excitement around that too in the chat too. So I'm glad you were able to mention that as well as the other ones. Obviously, each of these has its role. So I think that came through really clearly in what you're saying. And grateful for your presentation. Wanted to pass it to Zach, who I know is tracking some questions from the chat.
Sure, thanks. I'll just move it one more. Oop, there we go. We'll move it to this slide just for folks. If you have any questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. I see, Iona, you replied to a question around how long it took to get community to feel ownership of the project. I just wanted to see if you wanted to talk through that anymore.
Yes, this is such a great question because like reflecting on it as it happened, I was like, oh, this is great. Folks, like, you don't have to come out and do the surveys. What? I want to come out, but like, sure, if you don't need me. A lot of, and I'm sure you all know this, but like a lot of the work that community-based organizations do is it's a lot, oftentimes with no or little resources. So burnout can be high. We experienced a lot of turnover with our partners. So it felt like, you know, we were getting to a point where it's like, okay, we have something moving, we're moving along, we have our process, we've worked out some kinks, and then like someone would leave for another opportunity. And it felt like we had to keep starting over. often it got to a point where it was a lot and it was consuming. We were like, oh, are we starting from scratch here? But the nice part about the community-based organizations is that although there was turnover, there were folks who have been doing this work for decades. So they weren't going anywhere. They had their team of folks. And as much as we could like document things and make sure that we were like doing the best we could with training, because some things, you know, you just can't learn. They just come with the person. But as much as we could really document things and do that capacity building again, that's where we started feeling momentum, where it's like, okay, we can pass that on to someone. Okay, we can pass this on to people. It's always up for, it's not set in stone, but like, yes, let's document this, let's send this around. And after about 3 years, that's when I really felt like, okay, folks really have it down packed. They're reaching out to us before I reach out to them. Like, for example, there's certain program officer questions and things like that, or we had this like window of surveying and folks would reach out to us before we even got a chance to reach out to them. And I was very excited to see that they not only wanted to stay compliant and that we could check these boxes, like that's great, but also feeling like this wasn't a burden anymore when they reached out to me. So 3 years, I would say. I feel like if we didn't have as much turnover, it would have been 2.
Thanks for sharing that insight on how that process for building momentum went. One more, I think, smaller question about the program itself, and then one slightly more robust one that can kind of round out our Q&A. So that first one is, there was a question about when the participants in the program meet weekly, is it in school or in a community facility setting?
That's such a great question. All of these are good questions. So it was community-based in the sense that folks met at a community center or some space and community that was identified. And that was tricky, but also like powerful because of like just the sense of space. Like we ran into some, not issues, but some hurdles where we were trying to bring 2 communities to meet at once because they were so close, but understanding that like, depending on where we selected folks to meet, like that drew a line in the sand of like their interpretation of who we felt was the leader in that community. So community-based, yes, but like know that it is not as simple as like choosing a community center that everyone has access to. And then we also were able to identify physical space beyond just like the territorial things, but like physical space that can meet everyone's needs, things that were ADA compliant as much as possible. So long way to saying yes, in community.
Thanks. I think, Will, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we can do one more, and then for folks who want to stick around, we'll just share some of the resources that were discussed throughout. And I want to take a minute to just kind of wrap up, give thanks, and talk about what comes next. So yeah, one more question, I think.
Sure. I think this one's more about the kind of conceptualizing of PASS. The question is, did you have a program idea in mind before going to community and then work with them to more specifically define what the program looked like, or did you create the program from scratch with community members?
Yes, so we created with scratch with community members. We knew health was like what it needed to be based off the proposal. So, or the funding requirements, it had to be around health, but we spent a lot of time with like a youth advisory board and so resident advisory boards, but youth CAB, and then a CAB, I'm trying my best to not speak in acronyms, sorry, a youth community advisory board, an adult community advisory board. And we spent a lot of intense time building out that program together. So like what needed to be a part of it. Racial pride is something that we have segments on, and that came up with a few different members wanting that racial pride and civic engagement be a part of it. So although it was like health focused, we were able to kind of like drop in things that folks wanted that weren't directly related with health. And we spent 2 years building the program, and we did that with, as I said, with the CABs that are residents, but we had public health experts come through, various service providers all be a part of this. And in 2 years, yes, the different folks moved around, but we kept the same CABs, community advisory boards, the whole time.
Thank you for sharing that. That sounds I don't know, I hear you describe it over 2 years. I'm like, nice, you did it. And I'm sure 2 years felt like a long time to go through that process, and so much intention and patience and listening, accountability. So all of that comes through so clearly in your work, Iona. We're really grateful. Any parting words from you before I kind of wrap us up here?
Honestly, I'd like, if you all, like, based off what I'm seeing in the chat, you either are doing it or have thought a lot about this, don't be afraid. I like love this work. I promise you it'll bring you joy. But again, like, just get started, even if it's something small, and just always transparency is key, and just giving yourself grace and asking for it from community is going to get you really far.
Wise words. And I think you shared some, like, the spectrum of participation and engagement, and that helps folks see where they're maybe at on the spectrum. I know PI in our framing, we shared, like, you start with analyzing power, then you can move towards these other more challenging and often rife topics and activities. So knowing that you have Dr. Iona Harrison's seal of approval that you all are on the right path, and lots of resources to help you with that work. Some of them I'm just going to put on the screen here for you all. We're going to share out the slides, and all of the links are you can click on them to access them. We just wanted to say a huge thank you to Dr. Iona Harrison for joining us from Urban Institute. Thank you to the Prevent Connect team. Prevention Institute is just really grateful for all of the participants that joined. You all were super engaging, and we're just really grateful for all the insights and wisdom that are coming together here. We wanted to do a quick plug. There is a second session. We had actually our guest speakers for that session on from the California Department of Public Health. They were swimming around the audience with us here, and that is specifically being sent out to RPE and Delta recipients and their subrecipients. So you should have received an invitation for the second session, but the recording for this session as well as the second one are available to everyone. And we're just really grateful to get to learn all together, share our experiences, share our challenges, and continue doing this incredible prevention work that we're all doing. So thank you everyone for joining. Looking forward to connecting again. You can reach out to any of the names and people on these slides here. So grateful to you all. And one more big thanks to Iona. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Have a good week, everyone.